Alex Answer here early in the morning, and this is going to be the first of several podcasts, hopefully, on this topic relating to the Archons and how they interface with our human world. The microcosmic of politics, our personal relationships, our dreams, as well as the macrocosm, larger world events, world wars, talks of trips to Mars, space, exploration. What is really going on in this matrix, in this universe? And I do tend to think that this is a universe inside of an omniverse, kind of like Russian dolls. I believe that this is a time where we need to be having these conversations about what is really taking place with these entities or parasites, and how do we free ourselves, how do we protect ourselves. And now that we're, in a matter of 3 to 4 months to 5 months, we'll be in 2016. And years ago, I foresaw this as a time where I would be speaking more about this topic, and more people on the internet would be speaking about psychic protection from intrusion from outside. And there's a whole world of mind control that most human beings are not familiar with or aware of, beyond the perceived 5 cents reality propaganda from the mainstream media. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is based on my own experience. Some of the things may echo themes, topics, concepts mentioned in other podcasts and mentioned in other books. I think David Icke's put out a lot of good information on a level, and then there's a drop-off where there's just no hope. There's far more to this than just seeing the whole universe as love. And we're talking about psychic protection. And this is something that is a conversation that we can just continue, but how we protect ourselves from infiltration and then being directed and turned into a robot and being able to be affected and controlled by someone else pushing buttons linked to our emotional center. It is clear that there's some sort of an interface going on between the archonic system, that world, those controllers, and human beings through their emotional senses. Even though emotions are a very important part of the human experience, in many cases people are controlled by their very emotions. And as a preface, before I get any deeper, I don't think that we're powerless over these entities, whether someone chooses to call them demons or jinn or reptilian or anything else. The whole Archon terminology comes from the Gnostics. And in recent years, the name, the terminology, not to get confused with the words or make this about a word, but people have been looking at the Gnostic interpretation of what's been going on in this matrix for the last couple of years, hardcore. But even the Matrix movie itself, which is a very popular and well-known allegory for this reality or what could be going on, it is very much inspired by Gnostic teachings and Gnostic thought. So the Archon mythology has been alive in our sci-fi, both literature and movies. And we can also clearly see now, more clear now than years ago, what we can call the archonic manipulation or infiltration of the New Age movement. And learning a little bit more about the archonic agenda, what's known about it, and also the interfacing New World Order, which is just the physical manifestation of that archonic psychopathic mindset or energetic frequency. By knowing what we know now about this anti-human global agenda, we can see how the New Age movement has been promoting some of these concepts, some of the same concepts that the New World Order promotes. And a lot of distortion of genuine spiritual teachings, a lot of inversion, Archon style, taking certain concepts and themes and inverting them. Kind of like an upside down cross or something like that. Inverting spiritual teachings, perverting them, and using them for one's own agenda or one's own benefit. Now more people than ever are aware of how epidemic it's become of people using these law of attraction concepts for genuinely their own satanic agenda, to serve themselves, to feed their own beast, and to use magic in this realm for their own personal selfish gain, without a focus or concern for the rest of the world, or using our powers, our talents, our gifts of manifestation and creationism to actually heal the world or help the world or feed the world. And so in today's archonic cities, we are seeing men and women today that for the most part seem to be acting on behalf of something else. And by the way, I am taking a walk as I do this morning podcast. And I'm walking over some boulders on some property that I'm visiting here in the San Luis Valley as the sun is coming up. And so many people today are living so outside of nature that they don't even realize that they're under some form of control. Humans do recognize evil and the concept of a devil, but usually it comes up most when someone tries to present information about what's going on in the world. All of a sudden that person becomes evil to them. So a lot of these New Agers that say they don't want to focus on negativity, they don't want to be aware of current events, they don't want to label anything as negative. Well, they sure change their mind when they're faced with someone who is giving them perhaps a different explanation as to where they're getting their false information from, the fake channeling. All of a sudden, that's seen as really threatening. And because of technology, which is a double-edged sword, instantaneous communication can be used for mind control purposes, and it can also be used to share information that can liberate us. Some of that information that has been liberating us for years are people sharing their own pattern recognitions, people that study the way of the Archons and how they interface with human beings, human relationships, cause sabotage, create gossip, turn people against each other. This is a renaissance right now with technology and us becoming aware of the psychopathic mindset, how it's manifests in itself. There was someone that I interviewed that mentioned that in the 2009-2010 period, the search engine results for the word psychopath or sociopath had gone up incrementally, exponentially. In my own life, I started to have more complications with people living within the so-called normal society more and more, and that includes having roommates. Increasingly after 2009 and 2010. And it was also around this time period that I started my path of going off the grid, which is really in going mobile. Not just living in one place and renting one spot and working for one job. This whole going mobile, the freedom-based lifestyle is really in response to the what seems to be a great fall of consciousness that I'm detecting and others are detecting in these major cities and also some rural areas where the Babylonian programming, as one could call it, for lack of a better, lack of better words, but not to be limited to, instead of a collective shift in consciousness for the more enlightened, we are seeing this psychotic, sociopathic, apathetic, criminal mindset, selfishly focused, transhumanistic leaning. We can go on and on and on. But the collective psyche of today's man and woman, and it is important to be honest as to how men are programmed and women are programmed to be less conscious and to be able to identify that in today's society and not identify that with masculine or feminine energy, but to see that for the archonic archetype, you could call it the archonic archetype personality of today's day and age. It has a male version and a female version and just a general version overall that's anti-human, anti-man, anti-woman, anti-man, pro-machine, nihilist. And that's what some of us are really starting to see in today's day and age. So the alien invasion, so to speak, is very different than something presented by Hollywood. Instead of it being physical, it's something that I see as being something that's taking place on a consciousness level. It doesn't mean that they have all this power. People are looking at things in certain ways that I think has really prevented an understanding of what's going on. And it's the traditional ways that people tend to look at the subject. Whether we call it Western logic or Western thinking or low, there's different ways we can even describe that. Words really get in the way. So let's not let the words get in the way, because this is beyond words, what I'm trying to describe. And what I am trying to describe is beyond the awareness of most human beings. And that could be because of a physical, biological inclination to not understand certain concepts, where certain people may have the biology or their brain may be wired in such a way to where they can perceive certain things. I really don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I'll tell you what, in this podcast, I'm going to raise certain questions that I've raised for years. And in the question sometimes is the answer itself, as I've heard said before many times in various quotes. The wise path is one asking the questions even if an answer isn't immediately presented. So what I can say from personal experience is that while a lot of New Agers want to deny the concept of an evil in this universe, they do a 180 once they're presented with a different concept of what's going on and also a different interpretation of history. In the Gnostic texts and belief in the Nag Hammadi and whatnot, the Old Testament God is the demiurge, who is a counterfeit God or a false God, who convinces these lower conscious humans, one could say gullible humans, that are mesmerized by, lights in the sky and other things not too different than today's day and age, being convinced to worship something that in fact is not a god, but is a imposter. You see, there seems to be a quickening type of, you can call it just a growing awareness, like a 100th monkey type of a thing taking place, where people are going outside the box of the typical ways of looking at our history and where we come from. And this story, this Gnostic story, and the Sophic myth, as some people call it, it is growing. And I think what's important is for us to, once we understand the grasp of this potential circumstance that we're in, which I clearly believe that we're in, because everything that I've learned about Gnostic thought in a way mirrors my own thoughts, my own internal thoughts, my own internal knowing and feeling. Looking at Portland and talking about Portland being the city of the wounded goddess, coming up with that concept on my own. That it was a captured city controlled by some sort of evil, an evil that controlled the people even within Portland. That's a microcosmic fractal speck of a larger picture that sounds a whole lot like the Gnostic story. So I have a pinch myself moment that I've been speaking Gnostic themes since I started outside the box before I actually officially became aware of whatever Gnosticism was or is. And I still don't even read those books, but I'm aware of the terminology now. And I'm speaking the same language, apparently, that many other people are. I may not have the same story as Laura Eisenhower. And there are other people out there that come up with some pretty off-the-wall stuff about trips to Mars and things that can't really be substantiated. I'm not here to tell you that I have the whole truth. But what I do have is a truth. And this podcast is more of an introduction than me getting really deep into anything, but just pretty much preparing my audience for what we're going to get into. You have your truth, I have my truth, and one could debate as to which is more truthful. But I believe that there is a sense of power and even growth on the individual level when you share honestly what you believe your truth is, especially when it's done with the intention of helping people and bringing people together and helping to shine light on a potential solution to this problem, not simply to share my truth or create fear, which brings us back to a very important point in this introduction. Nothing said here is said here to promote a theme that we are powerless. And simply becoming aware of the potential circumstances that we're in, the Archon interference in human relationships, human politics, the human world. That's not to say that they have all the power in the world. And so some people have a natural knee-jerk reaction to assume that that is what someone is suggesting. And some people even say not to call them this, to call them this, otherwise that gives them power. And even though that makes sense on the surface level, Cameron Day's article, Never Call Them Archons, the very fact that the name gives them power, and believing in that is, I think, the danger in and of itself. Don't be afraid to call them anything. Just because something is being given a name, a label, doesn't necessarily mean that we're giving it power, but it can. If you are generally thinking of them as rulers instead of parasites, and if you are generally giving them credit where credit is not due, and we're going to talk about that more and more, the concept of the Archon-induced psychosis, where they try to convince the person that they're being gain-stalked by 100 people, or that this person's out to get them, or that they're going to die in this certain sense of circumstances. There's a whole world of mind control psychosis that is not easily detectable by human beings, but it's happening to human beings, and it's being induced by an outside force. Okay, there's many different versions of the psychosis taking place in today's day and age. And as someone is not aware of the sickness within the body, if you're not aware of the toothache, or if you're not aware of the indigestion, or if you're not aware of the pain or ache that tells you to slow down to rest your knee, then there could be some serious damage to your body. If you're not aware that your hand is burning when you set it on a hot stove, then you're going to have a charred hand. There's a reason why we have pain sensors built into our physical body. So there's a reason why we have things like pain and suffering. It is part of our survival mechanism in the physical realm. But some of these concepts do relate to the spiritual world. And so there are such a thing as sucker punch attacks and other forms. And sometimes bad things happen to good people or good spirits, especially in this matrix. And there's also a lot of people that are starting to understand that the New Age explanation of why certain things happen to certain people, the Lords of Karma, is not necessarily in line with the what is. There are explanations and reasons why in this domain, and then we can ask ourselves later how we got in this matrix and how we get out. But being in this domain, if you're, I'm not going to use the term light worker, but someone here doing amazingly positive things. The term light worker is used interchangeably, and there's a lot of archonic influence over the New Age movement today, and people that say that they are working with high evolved ascended masters that are their twin flames and channeling through them, and talks of DNA upgrades. And we really need to explore this concept further of how deeply the human psyche has been imprinted by this counterfeit spirituality that has been presenting itself as some sort of new revolutionary positive way of looking at the world and dealing with the world's problems. But before we get into that, it's just really important that people understand that it's important to identify when one is even under attack, or that they're even being programmed to begin with, if they're even able to go through a process of self-healing. Some of us, though, have seen how extreme the New Age and or religious and or scientific community, public educational school system, how parental upbringing, all those things and more, and other factors, have, in some cases, halted the human being's ability, be they male or female, to detect when there's intrusion taking place, when there's division taking place within the world, or when there's evil or malicious behavior, period, in the world, i.e. in government, where there are wars being staged and people are being manipulated, or on a more basic level. When men and women, when women and men are being turned against each other to fulfill an agenda to destroy the family. How many human beings, how many human women, how many human men today consciously understand that this is the agenda that is currently underway? That these dense population centers are more or less energy harvesting centers, where it almost seems to be a feeding ground of negative energy in these areas where people are disconnected from nature and artificially turned against each other. In this artificial world of time and the artificial world of scarcity and the artificial concept of limited space, all these things and more mirrored by the city. From my experience, there's a lot of food in some of these places. There's a lot of energy in some of these places that are easily harvested within the electromagnetic spectrum, where it, on some levels, in some areas, it appears to be an all-you-can-eat buffet. And again, the reason the Archons are not all powerful is because human beings have the power to alter and change that frequency, and perhaps even erase some of the entities themselves, erase them, remove them from existence, beyond the level of even fighting with them. Not to say that there isn't a place for a counterattack in some cases. In some extreme cases, I do believe in actual self-defense on a conscious level. But there are much more efficient uses of energy that go beyond even that. And so there are powers of the mind that I do believe that we have. And I'll also say that there are certain religious individuals out there or other that have downplayed the power of meditation and confused that with the work of the devil or demonic activity. There is a huge difference between taking a deep breath, which is actually scientifically proven to be healthy for you, and trying to channel other entities to give you information using a Ouija board or things of that nature. Those two things are light years apart. Unfortunately, there are people that have gotten deeply into the classic religious mindset that if you look outside of only Jesus Christ and you take the time to breathe and be aware of your body, that you're dabbling in the work of the devil and that you're open to possession. And some of these people are just a little uneducated about the difference between that and, say, channeling. You know, there's nothing wrong with breathing. It's important to breathe, to eat healthy food, to exercise, to drink healthy water, and to let water be exposed to sunlight. That has nothing to do with worshiping the sun. So there are ways that the archonic mindset of basic stupidity has tried to hijack the human consciousness on every conceivable level to keep it in a state of stupor. In a situation where we're not evolving from apes, we're evolving to apes, or something to that effect. And actually, as to where we really come from, that's another subject for another time. But of course, the agenda clearly is to keep us thinking that we are animals and that we're at an animal level, and that there are no consequences for our actions. And when concepts of God are brought in, it's brought in with a sense of punishment and racism and anger. And there are so many people that have been abused in some of these churches that they have just completely thrown out the idea of anything being real. So it's like a form of trauma-based mind control that I can't fix, and I don't even bother to even try to, there are people that say, hey, Alex, your beliefs are just out there, and I just want to let you know that. And I need to take that as a cue to not even try to change their outlook, to just keep doing what I'm doing on my own on this YouTube channel. But there's many people out there that have been greatly abused by certain religious institutions. Or maybe they perceive that they've been greatly abused, or they saw hypocrisy. I saw hypocrisy too growing up when someone was trying to indoctrinate me into the New Age religion mindset, which is why it's really important that I call out that. But I'm not going to be protective of classic traditional religious institutions that have been worshiping what seems to be more of an archon than an actual true God. I'm not in defense of those structures. But what I can clearly say is it seems to be an archon agenda to control religions, to cause trauma for women and men, to turn them away from even questioning anything about this matrix. And I think that's a tragedy when that happens. We should never stop questioning. We should never stop asking. We should never stop wondering. Just because there's aspects of this world that have been contaminated by the archons, religion, and things of that nature, that shouldn't lead us to then start fearing our own evolution, or start equating meditation and deep breathing and shielding and protecting ourselves with demonic activity. I mean, those are light years away from channeling, and there are people, by the way, that have decided to jump straight into channeling, that have skipped psychic protection, that have skipped being a good person, that have jumped straight into the world of trying to work with other beings that they believe are ascended. And what I think is clearly taking place is that there's an aspect of human biology that can clearly talk to certain spirits And I think it's easier for humans to be misled by lower spirits than to actually do the work, to actually clarify one's sight and inner hearing, if you will, to be able to truly work with aspects of their own higher consciousness that already has the knowledge and information to where they don't need outside help, okay, because they've cleared their own signal and they're not afraid of that. So there's a lot of ways in which this archonic agenda has spread itself out through different controlling belief systems, including the New Age, to keep people in the state of chasing its own tail and looking outside of itself, external saviorship theology, which for several years is how I've described the mainstream New Age movement. And through my experiences with my mother and also seeing her archonic self come out, her sociopathic controlling self come out, and how she tried to use New Age concepts to almost be dogmatic and controlling to back up her own promotion of the false goddess archetype with princess programming that she possessed herself and exemplified in nearly all of her actions. The self-serving attitude, the talks of multiple dimensions, the associations with people claiming to channel beings that took them to 44 dimensions, all hallmarks of Archon programming, seeking out extraterrestrials to upgrade our DNA, long trips to Seattle, Washington from rural Oregon in order to hopes of raising the DNA by being in places where the spirits told her and her friend to be, all hallmarks of hearing voices and being influenced by entities that in no way, shape, or form ever delivered anything positive, but in fact brought the death to the family, completely divided the family. And I will say that again slowly, completely divided a family. And this is the realm that the Archons work in. It's dividing people. And on the most basic level, it's dividing family. And it can be done over belief systems. And people can be turned against each other. And certain individuals can be convinced by the spirits in their head that they are ascended, enlightened masters. And everybody else around them is dog shit. And the only problem with the world is that the whole world doesn't see their own ascended nature and basically has failed to worship them. This may sound far out to you, but on a root level, a lot of women in today's day and age are suffering from this delusion. And there's plenty of ways in which the Archons have controlled the world of men. And obviously, we're going to talk about the world of world war and what's coming. And that is a major deception. But only, a coming deception in a long string of deceptions of certain interests funding both sides of a war. But those financial interests, if you will, serving the agenda of the Archons that are constantly dividing and controlling order out of chaos. And the next World War III scenario is going to be the coming extension of that. To further attack human consciousness. That's where we're in right now. That's what's on the timeline, not a collective shift in consciousness. But for a lot of women on Earth today, and this is something that a lot of people don't want to look at, women will act like they're going to be in defense of other women if they hear the programming of the world criticized. I don't see them jump to the rescue of other women, say in the Middle East, that have been harmed at the hands of NATO troops or Western troops. And I've said this for years, repeatedly. It's when I see that, I will see the modern woman of today's day and age is actually there for her sister. Until that happens, for the most part, most women are only out for themselves and their own gain. And they will only come to the perceived defense of women when they feel that their own programming and behavior is being criticized, something that they identify with. And so when we identify with the archetype, when we understand the archetype, archonic infiltration of female consciousness, we're able to see why some women have used basic spiritual teachings and concepts to create only for themselves and to create worship around themselves. We see where the I am a goddess, I am a god, I am a goddess, I am God. We see where that archetype comes from. In no way, shape, or form do I see the souls that are trapped on earth right now as currently at God form. maybe a fallen form. Maybe we're in a form where we're in training for something else. But this bullshit propaganda that we are these enlightened little goddesses, when in reality, when you look at what humans are doing to the earth, when you look at just the nasty nature of today's man and woman in general, it's anything but conscious, and actually leads one to become very suspicious of the nature of consciousness that will call this conscious. That is in and of itself an alarm bell. The movement to call the unacceptable the enlightened, the lack of empathy for the victims of war, the lack of emotion, the artificial happiness. It seems to be almost an artificial consciousness, not one that I identify to be fully human. Back to our conversation of the archonic invasion of human consciousness today, and our central theme that we will return to, of how to protect our own minds. From infiltration, from the spell of believing that this is the world that we've been waiting for, of thinking that all this is okay, that it's always been this way, that maybe just jumping fully into the machine may be the right thing to do. Oh yes, maybe we can harness the power of our consciousness and jump light years ahead and evolve in the flesh and extend our life and download our consciousness and go to other planets to think we can escape our problems here on the earth where we were actually put naturally. So there are many counterfeit spiritual movements, and there are many counterfeit spiritual breakthroughs that are leading modern man and woman astray. And it's also important to remember that the core of a lot of this is human relationships and human sexuality, which can be hijacked just like a dream. In the same way, like a movie, where someone keeps ending up in the realm of Freddy Krueger for whatever reason. There are people that keep, for many, many years, their dreams, their sexual desires, their moods, their emotions, their very thoughts, in many cases, are not inherently their own. There are potentially countless human beings that are operating on some form of remote control. And when you talk about the concept of something trying to terraform the world to where, I mean, it's like we're familiar with the concept of different forms of racial supremacy and racism of different forms. And we're also aware of the human obsession to breed certain types of dogs and horses. And we're also aware of humanity's obsession to alter the behavior of rats so it can more deeply understand its own psychology, as many experiments have been done on rats and mice, which are also mammals, in order to more deeply understand us as human beings. See, this archonic archetypal hierarchy of dealing with obsession, of trying to control genetics and control behavior in perceived lower creatures, it's happening to us on a massive, large scale, on a level that most human beings don't understand. So there are certain things going on in the world to keep certain bloodlines intact. And that means pairing up certain bloodlines on a sexual level, and also making sure certain bloodlines never come together, because certain combinations of genetics might be a greater threat to the Archons, either because those babies have a greater ability to either perceive them because of some of their bloodlines having a deeper connection to the earth, or certain lines coming together, and thus some sort of a magical effect takes place. I think these things are taking place. And I think that's why there is an agenda to dumb down genetics, to put certain things in the food, and to keep certain bloodlines intermarrying. And I think that there is an agenda of the Archons, which is extended to the world of the, what's known as the elite of the world, to intermarry, to keep the bloodlines pure. I think those bloodlines I think pure isn't the right word. To keep the bloodline intact to the archonic programming. Whereas when someone procreates outside the family with a very different genetic code, that baby is a very different baby. So I don't think the Archons actually want a world where there's true genetic diversity. But I do believe that in the media, there is an agenda to create a hysteria and fear of the darker skinned, and a world that is not fully white. I see evidence of it in the media, the articles. and also the engineered events to create a panic situation in the United States and Europe. ISIS comes to mind, but knowing that ISIS is controlled, and also many of these nations are controlled, and they have these global coalitions to fight ISIS, Russia included. Clearly there's some sort of global system of deception that will cover up 9/11, that will stage a third world war, that will declare ISIS a worldwide threat. And this is clearly more evidence that Russia, China, and the United States and many other countries are working together and in a real sense cooperating, not at war. Meaning whatever is coming in terms of war, in terms of nuclear fallout, in terms of bombs dropping, in terms of missiles, all this that's coming years down the line is an artificial program of the Archons to create a cataclysmic situation on the earth, at least energetically, to feed themselves. So people have interpreted this, that see some of this coming, and they think it's a sign that the Archons, or whoever, are losing power, and that this is some sign of desperation. I will not jump to that conclusion. And I will keep my conversation limited to what I believe to be the truth. And that there is something going on with the sun and the Archons. And the way the sun affects us, I've talked about how man could be duped into war because of the way his body is affected by the sun. So we see staged events during solar flares. And this is really coming from the Archonic agenda. And it's the next solar cycle starting around 2022, 2023, the next solar cycle that I have felt for years will be more powerful than this one, even though you hear talks of solar minimum. You hear talks of solar minimum. You read articles about who's the sun dying. There's no evidence to suggest that. And I feel that there's more evidence to suggest it's the quiet before the storm. So looking at the history of the stage wars that have taken place, likely controlled by other forces on this planet that have had control of these governments, there is a sense of understanding that if you staged events during solar flares, you're going to get the most results. You're going to get people reacting to it. The hormones, testosterone, the glands in the body, stress hormones, many other things taking place within the physical human body. I believe this knowledge is known at the highest levels. Of course, it's not taught in schools how we're affected by the sun. But the dark occultist above the New World Order understands the science of this. And it doesn't mean that the sun is evil or that we can't do positive things during these periods of solar flares. But the Archonic agenda is to invert energy, control energy, and take something positive and turn it into a negative. And that is why during these periods, which should be leaps in humanity's evolution, inventing things, new ideas, new consciousness, new paths, new cities, new realities, new books being written. They would rather us, instead of creating things, would rather us destroy unmindfully. Instead of destroy them and exercise our inherent right to self-defense and blast these entities out of reality, they would prefer us stay in a state of ignorance and to blame each other for our problems, for our suffering, for our hunger, for our economic decline, for our sexual frustrations, turn men against women, turn women against men. And that's what we're seeing right now. That's where we're at. I'm Alex Ansary. It is late August in the year 2015. I have described the world that we're in right now. A world where men and women are greatly divided, where people are preparing for the next third world war, where they assume that it's a real third world war, where maybe Putin and China are going to be maybe fairer systems than the United States. Most people do not suspect or believe that they're all working together. So people, for the most part today, are being programmed by external events. Be afraid, prepare for war, prepare for the EMP, hate women, hate men, hate yourself, lack scarcity, fear diversity. They don't promote diversity. They genuinely fear diversity, and people are saying that the New World Order's agenda is actually diversity, and things like racial equality, and things of that nature, and exterminating white people. And I think that in reality, we're dealing with the same archonic system that's trying to turn every racial group against every racial group. There is no real preference, and that's a bullshit lie. nor is the New World Order pro-Islamic. They will only use groups to a certain extent to piss off another group. So anything anyone reads about pro-Islamic stuff in the United States is only being done deliberately, if it's even being done. There's also fake reports out there. There's also actors. You know, people talk about hoaxes and staged events when it comes to shootings. If that's the case, it's not difficult to pay people to say if they support a certain ideology and that they represent a certain Islamic group or African-American group or black group, or they want some sort of insane demand here. And so we're reading reports. People are reading reports. Some of them are fake, and some are based on supposed real people that could be very well actors that are out there on the world stage to create more racial and religious tension, when all it is the world is a stage and everyone's an actor and they are playing their role literally in front of the world for the world to see. So what the world is missing right now is an understanding that there's aspects of whatever we are that we just called human nature that seems to be something that when we are spiritually unfit, when we are unhealthy, and when we are easily susceptible to programming, walk-in energies can completely use us by remote control, be us male or female. And there's specific ways I'll talk about in future podcasts how men and women are specifically targeted. There's a general overlap, but there's custom ways in which they try to get us to identify with just being male, and ways they try to get us to identify with just being female, or a white female, or a black female, or a black African-American female, or a white. See, there's so many different. Then there's wealthy. There could be the poor white male or the wealthy white male, and the type of ways that each demographic is targeted with how they are expected to behave, and other beliefs about their status in class. So you see there are these different boxes: male, female, racial, economic, and also the states that we're from and the geographies that we're from. And the geographies of the earth greatly influence the behaviors of most all men and women in ways that most all men and women would deny, that claim that they're independent thinkers that are not influenced by energies. Ooh, that's mystical. It's not mystical, and it's not New Age. It's reality. So we, as human beings, are very affected by other energies and affected by environments, and we have different levels of susceptibility. And we seem to have a built-in wiring, kind of like, the Matrix, where it plugs in, and it's our physical brain. It's the current design of the lobal structure. It's the current design of the human brain, of the cerebral cortex. And as long as we're in this kind of a world, most human beings with that kind of biology are going to operate within the confines of that biology. Certain aspects of society, just like throughout old times, may break out of that box and perceive awareness or things outside of the five sense reality, or what they're seeing with their eyes, or perceiving concepts that are not normally perceived by the mass consciousness of their particular day and age. This is obviously a constant theme that we're seeing and perhaps experiencing for those of us that have been on this planet or perhaps elsewhere in this universe more than once. And so I've come to peace with that concept. I've come to peace with the concept that the majority follows and is under this form of archonic hijacking of human consciousness in this dimension of reality. And the goal is to evolve beyond this kind of reality where we keep ending up in this type of a world that's controlled by the Archons, this kind of a universe. And increasing our ability to see things as they are for ourselves with our own energy while we're here, without calling out for middlemen or for spiritual welfare to help us out through artificially induced. Obviously, I'm having speech problems now. See, and our biology can be affected in this realm. The question is, what are we doing in this realm? This is the question. We can only do so much while we're in this realm. And the reality is a lifetime goes by like that. And there are way too many people out there that have made their lifetime the center of the universe. And it is important for us to be here now and to be responsible for our actions. But, our life, I just realized, like, the average span of a human life, 70 years, who knows where it's going to be in a few years, whether it's going to go up or down. But at 36 or at 35 years old, I'll be 36 next year, I'm already at half the average human lifespan. And the goals, the true goals that we should have, should not be solely based in the physical realm. And so people get very caught up in, when are people going to wake up? And when is there going to be, the real collectivism, the new age trip up to the spaceship, the Christian rapture. People are waiting for these black and white events, even the conspiracy realm, the mass kill 90% without realizing, like, we're already in an artificial Archon controlled structure that controls men and women through the psychic realms, the dream realms most people don't even know exist because they've been frightened into not even looking at those catacombs of their own mind and asking themselves, are their own thoughts their own? And what we're starting to realize is this is a giant realm that's been terraformed for mind control on the largest scale. And how the New World Order and the alien agenda and World War III and everything is being fulfilled, but done through the physical hands of human men and women, the human women bringing forward the vessels of life. And both human men and women not realizing how the genders are being turned against each other, how the family's being destroyed, how the energy of women is being perverted to be overly masculine, to not even recognize their own sacred feminine, and for everything to be a war with males over the perception that the control structure is simply coming from men, or that it's masculine energy, like perverted teachings out there to create animosity and keep people not only in bondage, but to take them to the next level. This is a period where men should be protecting women and women should be protecting men. I think we need to be having each other's back. Having each other's back. Having each other's back. This is why I can't live in cities anymore. I can no longer live in these environments where we are told to be afraid of each other, but we need each other more and more. We need each other's love. We need each other's compassion. And yet there are people out there that will say that this division that's taking place is good for women, is good for men, and that it represents independence for women. And anyone with any intelligence can see that the dependency for women to have on this government, on the government protecting them, on the government feeding them, and not just women but men as well. But it's very important for us to see how they have specifically divided man and woman. And there are going to be people out there that will call it sexist to see someone call out the programming of our society. And they will in turn then call it delusional and schizophrenic to discuss archons. Society has done everything that it can do to me to insult me. And what I can say is that I'm going to go through the future meeting new people. They're going to constantly say, Alex, we checked out your channel and we think you're batshit. We don't know if we can even be your friend. And it's always going to come back down to the Archon series. And that's fine. I'm now in a situation where I don't even have my own land. I'm staying on property where I feel that I'm safe because I'm far away from people. And if this isn't a perfect time for me to share some of my experiences and some of what I really think is going on in an open air environment under the sun as it's rising, it's keep pouring down on me 11, 12 in the morning, speaking into an iPhone that I only use for listening now to podcasts and doing voice memos and making podcasts. If this isn't a perfect place to do it, I don't know what is. But I have to share my truth. And the greatest impact on humanity that the Archons has made has been the distrust that has been built up of good men in the minds of most women on the earth today. The majority of human beings are vulnerable to archonic hijacking And authors like Evie Lorgan, who wrote Alien Interference in Human Relationships, have for years been discussing the possibility of certain entities having an agenda to get certain human beings to procreate for whatever reason based on abiology or tracking certain souls throughout the cosmos that are in this potentially controlled incarnation time wheel. For those of you that have never heard of the concept of the Lords of Karma actually being Archons to keep us in a controlled universe, this concept and perspective, which goes contrary to New Age teachings, is out there. I do believe that we are responsible for our own actions. But some of the messages that have been shared about karma by some of these so-called ascended masters, done through certain channels that have opened up YouTube accounts and started websites over the last couple of decades, there's been a massive brainwashing process taking place. And I think that because of the apparatus that we have in the human brain, that there are certain ways that men can be targeted through the sexual senses as well as females, as well as the psyche, as well as the survival centers. And there's ways that our instincts that normally might help us that are in the body can be perverted by certain things being manipulated in the external world, i.e. making things all about money, as opposed to actually going out and getting the raw resource itself that the money buys. That's perverted focus. That's perverted relationships. But one of the things that we're going to talk about that you're not going to hear from, say, some of the female talk show hosts that talk about channeling or rather protecting yourself against archons. A lot of them will talk about being on the ascension path, and you'll see the A word brought out a lot. And there is a massive archon deception within spiritual groups to convince women that they're ascending, that they're moving beyond the dimension of reality that they currently were on, that they need to, that the earth needs to, and that they need to work with certain spirits to fulfill this. And it's through that mechanism alone that a lot of this interference and psychic control comes in. It's through this faith in these spiritual helpers. This is actually very hard to talk about because it's getting into levels that I know is going to be contrary to most of the women, to what they've heard and what they've believed. But ultimately, the wiring within the human female today is engineered specifically to continue to procreate the dominator child and to bring forth the type of consciousness and to not bring forth a higher consciousness, a baby, through an act of love with a man that's based on generally that man being a good person, him actually fighting the good fight against the systems of control. This is a deeper subject for a deeper time. It's because of this perversion of sexuality. It's because good men today's day and age are not attractive to the modern Homo sapien woman that's walking the earth today. Because of all the games and manipulations that she is playing, the new generation of human beings that continue to be, no matter what the universe tries to send in, or the omniverse, to try to correct the situation, human beings are ultimately creating their own universe and reality based on the energies that they continue to bring into the planet, based on the values that they have that lead to them being with the person in the first place before the procreation takes place. This is a level of discussion that you will not see other people talk about. It is as taboo as it gets to talk about how the type of people that people have chosen to develop relationships with is ultimately how we are in a slave species planet. The male responsibility is missing in a lot, but I think the MGTOW movement is a reflection of men that are trying to override their own sexuality to just chase the hot female and realize that unless there's consciousness there behind those good looks, it might be better to really abstain from that energy and maybe spend a couple years living like a monk. And I think what's taking place now is because of the archonic infestation is so bad. There are many people that have left the dating scene because they have seen some of these extremely good-looking women in today's day and age harboring archonic spirits because there is some sort of agenda to divert our focus from our good work or any great work and keep it on lust, to keep men constantly trying to please women or gain the love of a woman. And all of my own imprisonment within this realm has dealt with either wanting, just recognition from my own mother, or wanting women in today's society to genuinely recognize and appreciate who I am. And as long as a man stays in that state of psychology of wanting women to recognize him or them, he's going to continue to be controlled by the Archons and the Archonic spirits that work through those women. And I actually stopped talking about the Archonic influence over human relationships when I left Portland, because my life got a little bit better. And what I realized and what I experienced in the last couple months is heavy Archonic influence through several women, including one that purported to want to help me. And I noticed certain behaviors and certain signs that this person had been hit with some heavy subliminals. And there are ways in which I have become close on a friendship level, email level, to women over the years that I've seen shift their personalities on me. And all of a sudden, like an upset snake, a message will come out about my inferiority, about my about just in general. And as I say that, this strange cackling comes from the canyon, from a bird. I've noticed the patterns in people shifting personalities and repeating things that took place in their dreams. There's been a lot of strange situations that have taken place in the dream realm of women at one point or another that have helped me. And what it is it's Archon attack. And I think certain ex-girlfriends and my mother got it the worst. And this is not a level of information that you can just share with the average person. I know sharing it on this YouTube channel, is sharing this message with a lot of people that would consider this perspective crazy. And I'm not going to let ridicule, the Archon's main card trick, ridicule from your peers, to stop me. I've seen countless examples of dream penetration, infiltration, and messages dealing with me perhaps not being who I say I am, me being a cheater, me working with dark spirits. That's a big card trick of a lot of the women that have been duped into the New Age movement and channeling movement. It's just label the male as negative, and maybe to use his background or his sex against him, and to exercise the dark ego to preach this counter spiritual message, that it's about materialism and nice cars and having things, and not actually about activism and taking risks and making videos and speaking the truth regardless of whether people appreciate it or not. I've had to walk a certain path to where both my sacred and feminine, sacred masculine and feminine aspects of myself have been under assault by this world. But in particular, how I've seen women in this world walk on that aspect of myself that actually will stand and will speak for women around the world that have been abused by this new world order structure, where they be Afghan women in today's day and age that are in horrible situations because of this manufactured crisis in the Middle East, to Palestinian women, to people that are basically victims of war and sexual assault simply because they're in the war zone, because bad things happen to women in invaded countries. So when you know that there are circumstances that have led to those countries being invaded, and when you know that this can be traced back down to certain governments, then that's pretty dark energy for people to just keep their mouths shut. But have women actually recognized that goodness in me, despite the voices in their head that say that I'm a bad person, that I have all these wicked intentions? They don't recognize that because they don't yet have that ability yet. Their consciousness is one to where they will be under the spell that ultimately I must hate humans or Oregonians or Portlanders or something, and that I don't genuinely care. And I'm the kind of person that should be punished. See, this is all hallmarks of mind control and a society that has some sort of an infestation going on. Because 5 years ago, society wasn't that cold-hearted. there were still some aspects of women in today's day and age that showed some genuine appreciation. Now, only the women that show some appreciation have some sort of agenda to fuck with my emotions. And that's what I saw the last year. What I saw the last year was the few people that I thought be helpful, in fact, had their own agenda to manipulate my emotions once they got close enough and once they gained enough trust from me. And you would even say affection from me, appreciation from me. Thank you so much for contributing for me to get outside of Portland. Thank you. That develops a huge emotional cord when you're in a state of gratitude. And then that gratitude can turn towards dependence when someone tries to create circumstances or lead you to believe that they're going to do something for you, only to punish you and launch into an archonic attack on who and what you really are. I've had a really massive education as to how my whole world can be infiltrated as long as I'm around other people that are not able to keep themselves grounded from archonic conscious hijacking, to where one day they support what I'm doing, and the next day they go to sleep, take a pill, take a drink, and they wake up, and I am the devil. There's a lot more I need to share about this situation, but this is a day and age where we need to be discussing how some of these forces have divided our friendships, have infiltrated our own consciousness at one point or another. To not be so much in darker ego, because not all of ego is dark. You know, part of your ego is involved when you're walking along the cliff and you're separating yourself from going completely into oneness with the water, because you want to keep your internal organs in your body and not spilling out through your guts and through your rib cage. Okay, so your positive ego is aware of your body, and you are not going to walk over the cliff. But there's also darker ego that wants us to think that we have all the answers, that we're a god or a goddess, that we're not here on the earth to actually learn something and evolve beyond what we are. Notice how New Age and religion both follow the same trained school of thought, because they're both controlled by the Archons. The